The year was 1907. For the American industrialist, it was the zenith of ambition. Steel rails were laying a grid across the continent. Skyscrapers were climbing toward the clouds in New York and Chicago. And the engine of it all, the relentless, hungry blast furnace, required one thing above all: iron ore. The richest deposits lay near Lake Superior, in the cold, rough-hewn lands of Minnesota and Michigan. The challenge wasn't mining the ore, it was moving it. Between the mines and the mills of Pittsburgh and Gary lay over 1,000 miles of water, the Great Lakes. In the shipyards of Lorain, Ohio, the American Shipbuilding Company was producing floating behemoths known as Lakers. These ships were not sleek ocean liners. They were functional, flat-decked, self-unloading machines designed to carry maximum cargo with minimum fuss. They were the unsung titans of American economic power. On August 17, 1907, the SS Cypress slid into the waters of the Black River. She was a state-of-the-art vessel, a classic tin-stacker bulk carrier, 432 feet long, capable of hauling over 7,000 tons of raw material. She represented the pinnacle of Great Lakes naval architecture for her time. Her captain, George F. Prentice, was a seasoned veteran, a man whose life had been dictated by the shifting moods of the lakes. He knew their fury, their sudden, almost malicious violence. The Cypress was registered to the Lackawanna Steel Company, a colossal entity in the burgeoning steel empire, and its mission was simple: transport the wealth of the Mesabi Range to the hungry mills on the southern shores of Lake Erie. This first journey, her maiden voyage, was not just a delivery, it was a statement. Chapter 2. A Gathering Storm on Superior. The Cypress started her career with a run of successful voyages, proving herself to be a reliable, powerful ship. She sailed in an age of staggering prosperity, where the tonnage shipped across the Great Lakes often exceeded the combined traffic of the Suez and Panama Canals. This inland maritime industry was the muscle that allowed the USA to surpass Britain and Germany as the world's leading industrial power. On August 2, 1907, the Cypress docked at Superior, Wisconsin, to receive her final, fateful load. Into her vast open holds, thousands of tons of heavy, red iron ore, taconite pellets, were dumped from the elevated railway trestles, settling low and dense in her belly. This was the most critical aspect of lake shipping. The ore's weight made the ship stiff, prone to rapid rolling in high seas, a known but accepted danger. As Captain Prentice prepared to depart, a meteorological shadow fell across the region. The autumn storms on Lake Superior were legendary, brutal, and unpredictable. They weren't merely weather, they were cataclysms. The wind, given a 1,000-mile-long fetch of water, could whip the lake into walls of green water, known to capsize ships larger than the Cypress with terrifying speed. On August 11th, the Cypress left the safety of the port. The weather forecast was troubling, but not prohibitive. Yet as the great vessel steered east, cutting across the vast expanse of the lake, something shifted. The barometers dropped with alarming speed. A storm was not coming. A tempest was brewing.
Captain Prentice, standing in the pilot house of the Cypress, would have been accustomed to the gales of November, the dreaded, often deadly fall storms. But the one sweeping down across Lake Superior on October 11, 1907, had the malicious energy of a witch of November, a phrase sailors used for the lake's worst tempests. The wind, clocking from the northwest, was driving the waves directly broadside against the Cypress as she steamed eastward. The biggest danger to a bulk freighter loaded with iron ore was not simply the violence of the waves, but the density of the cargo. Iron ore, especially the heavy, powdered taconites she carried, was unforgiving. If water got into the holds, the saturated ore could shift, or the ship, weighted down like a stone, would become stiff, too quick to roll back and forth, tearing the hull apart with the sheer force of its own momentum. Early that afternoon, a passing steamer, the George Stephenson, made a disturbing observation. The Cypress was trailing a red wake. This was a sign of serious trouble. It meant that water was mixing with the iron ore dust in the holds, and the mixture was being pumped out, or, more ominously, leaking out through the seams of the hull. This observation, logged by Captain D.H. Keyes of the Stephenson and noted in the subsequent investigation, painted a clear picture. The new state-of-the-art Cypress was taking on water and straining under the load of her first great cargo. By 7 p.m., the storm was a screaming chaos of wind, spray, and black water. The ship was rolling violently, the hull plates groaning under stress. The vessel, only 21 days old and hailed as a masterpiece of American engineering, was fighting for its life. Chapter 4. The Sole Survivor. The crew of 23 men, mostly working stiffs from the industrial towns of the lower lakes, knew the risks, but no one could have anticipated the catastrophic speed of the end. Among the crew was second mate Charles G. Pitts, a young man who would become, almost against his will, the historical witness to the sinking. Pitts later testified to the U.S. Steamboat Inspection Service that the Cypress had been struggling against the mountainous seas for hours, steadily taking on a list to the port side. The combination of the heavy seas, the strained hull, and the shifting cargo of ore finally overwhelmed the ship. At approximately 7:45 p.m., a rogue wave, or perhaps the culmination of structural failure, hit. The Cypress lurched dramatically to port and with terrifying swiftness capsized. The theory wasn't that she sank slowly, she turned completely over, the sheer mass of the iron ore flipping the vessel like a toy boat, and plunged to the bottom in a matter of minutes. In the darkness and the 38 degrees water, there was no time for a distress call. The great iron giant simply vanished from the surface of Lake Superior. Only 4 men, including Pitts, managed to scramble onto a small emergency life raft that had been secured behind the pilot house and was torn free as the ship went under. They were adrift on the most dangerous body of water in America, facing an impossible night. For 5 harrowing hours, the 4 men, Pitts, the first mate, the watchman, and 1 other crewman, clung to the small wooden raft. The lake was a swirling maelstrom of frigid spray and massive breaking waves. Hypothermia began its slow, deadly work, numbing limbs and blurring minds. As the night wore on, the raft drifted toward the Michigan shoreline near the sparsely populated area of Deer Park. Just 300 feet from the apparent safety of the beach, the surf zone, a violent, chaotic region of crashing waves, claimed its final victims. The raft was flipped, throwing all 4 into the freezing white water. Charles Pitts, miraculously, was washed ashore, battered, alone, and barely conscious. The other 3, including Captain Prentice, who some accounts place on the raft, were swallowed by the surf. Pitts staggered a half-mile down the beach until he collapsed outside the Deer Park life-saving station. He was the sole survivor. 22 men were lost. Chapter 5. The Post-Mortem of a Titan. The sinking of the Cypress, a brand-new vessel lost on only its 2nd voyage with a massive loss of life, shocked the maritime community. It raised immediate, uncomfortable questions that touched the very foundation of the industrial boom. Was the speed of modern shipbuilding compromising safety? Was the drive for ever-increasing cargo capacity pushing ships beyond their limits? The formal investigation, relying almost solely on Pitts's testimony and the George Stephenson's Red Wake report, concluded that the tragedy was likely caused by the shifting of the iron ore cargo after water had entered the holds. This was a critical finding. It underscored a grim fact of the industrial age. America's relentless pursuit of production often outpaced its commitment to safety. Ship design would change, moving toward the deep-keeled, double-hull construction that defined later Lakers. But this change was paid for by the lives lost on the Cypress. The story of the Cypress became another mournful entry in the ledger of Great Lakes losses, a story that was eventually submerged by the sheer scale of American industrial growth and the even deadlier storms that would follow, like the Great Storm of 1913 that dwarfed the Cypress loss. The ship and its mystery rested in the crushing cold and darkness of Lake Superior, becoming a ghost on the map, its exact location unknown for a century.
For decades, the search for the Cypress was an exercise in futility. Lake Superior is notoriously deep, reaching over 1,300 feet in some areas, and its cold, iron-rich bottom is littered with magnetic anomalies that make sonar searching a nightmare. The wreck was presumed to be miles offshore, too deep and too remote to ever be found. The Great Lakes shipwreck hunting community, a dedicated group of historians, divers, and high-tech explorers, treated the Cypress as a holy grail wreck. Not because of monetary value, shipwrecks in the Great Lakes are protected as historical sites, but because of the purity of the mystery. In the early 21st century, the search focused on the area near Deer Park, Michigan, spurred by the vague coordinates derived from Pitts' survival. In August 2007, a full century after she sank, a team from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society, GLSHS, using advanced side-scan sonar, located a large, promising target lying on the lake bottom at a depth of 460 feet. The team initially believed they had found the SSDM Clemson, another massive steel freighter lost with all hands in 1908 in the same general area. The first visual confirmation run with a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, was a dizzying descent into absolute darkness and cold. The ROV images were stunning. The ship was lying on its port side, completely intact, a testament to the preserving cold of the lake. But the expected name, DM Clemson, was nowhere on the bow. Confusion reigned aboard the research vessel. What had they found? The ROV pilot, maneuvering the camera across the mud and the debris fields, which included scattered rust-red iron ore pellets, finally pushed the machine toward the stern. The water currents made the task treacherous, but then the name appeared, painted clearly across the fantail in the eerie glow of the ROV's lights. Cypress, Fairport. The sheer astonishment on the recovery vessel was palpable. They had not only found the Cypress, but they found it 10 miles south of where it had been officially presumed to be for 100 years. This revelation corrected a major error in maritime history and proved that the testimony of the sole survivor, Charles Pitts, was accurate regarding the final minutes of the ship. The wreck lay only 8 miles north of the Deer Park life-saving station where Pitts washed ashore. The discovery was more than just a find. It was a time capsule that provided the final factual evidence of what happened that night in 1907. The image of the fully loaded, perfectly intact hull resting on its side solidified the theory of a sudden, catastrophic capsizing due to cargo shift and water ingress. The pristine condition of the wreck, including railings, doors, and even the original paint preserved in the cold, fresh water, offered a chilling, direct link to the human cost of America's industrial might. The SS Cypress was no longer a ghost, it was a monument.